The graphs look remarkably similar. It's just collapse, collapse, collapse. And therefore, we live in an era of collapsing trust. The graphs all look the same. So we live in this era of temporary organizations being run by temporary managers for the benefit of temporary owners. And we don't know what to call it. We can't even say it's bad because we're all supposed to pretend that we think all the different ways of making money are equally good, but no one really thinks that. Certainly not anyone who went into solar. Are you kidding me? No, we have a belief, I call it the builder's intuition, that the best way to make money is to create more value than you capture. Because then all the profit you make by definition leaves the world better off.
This is Benoy Thanjan, your host of the Solar Maverick Podcast. Today, I'm very excited to welcome Eric Ries, New York Times bestselling author of The Lean Startup, and his new book, Incorruptible: Why Good Companies Go Bad and How Great Companies Stay Great. The Lean Startup has influenced entrepreneurs around the world, including me. I read it while starting Renew Energy, and its principles help shape how I approach building my company. In Incorruptible, Eric takes on a deeper question. How can companies grow, raise capital, and become successful without losing the mission and the values that made them worth building in the first place? In this conversation, we discuss mission-driven entrepreneurship, shareholder pressure, corporate governance, investor alignment, AI, and how renewable energy and climate technology companies can protect both their purpose and their long-term value. Let's get into it. Hi, this is Benoy, your host of the Solar Maverick Podcast. I'm really excited on this episode of the podcast to have Eric Ries. He is a New York Times bestselling author, and he has a new book. It's called Incorruptible. I actually have it right here. Why Good Companies Go Bad and How Great Companies might stay great. And you might be familiar with his New York Times bestseller, The Lean Startup, which came out in 2011. Eric, I really appreciate you making time to be on the Solar Maverick Podcast. And I read your book when I first started my company and used a lot of those concepts. And now we've been in business as a solar developer and consulting company for 14 years. So I really appreciate all the
congratulations
and thought leadership that you've done within the entrepreneurship sector.
It's my pleasure. Happy to be here.
Yeah, definitely. If you could start off maybe talking about your background and obviously Incorruptible. I think it came out about maybe 2 to 3 weeks ago. You could get it obviously in bookstores now, obviously online as well. It would be great maybe if you could start off talking about your 20 years of experience in entrepreneurship, obviously Incorruptible, and then your book, The Lean Startup, to start off the podcast.
Sure. Yeah. Gosh, I have been in entrepreneurship for quite a while now. And I got into it through engineering. So I was one of those kids, I grew up programming computers. I wanted to just make cool products. And I remember when I first found out that you could get paid for computer programming, like I couldn't believe it. I thought I was going to have to pay them, but now they pay me. This is incredible. So I thought I would just be doing that my whole career because I thought software technology was the most powerful force in the universe. And then I was like, no, it's not technology, it's products. And then I was like, no, it's not products, it's teams, it's people that make the products. So management is the most powerful force in the universe. And my whole career has been this kind of peeling back the layers of what are the most powerful forces that human beings can use to create impact in the world. And the new book is, about realizing that no matter how good your management system is, there's still something yet deeper that you have to grapple with. But the reason I know that and know it so well is I spent a lot of time changing how management is done, and in particular in the field of entrepreneurial management. That is the management that happens when we face high uncertainty about the future. And at first, that was just about me and Silicon Valley startups, tech startups. But because Lean Startup became such a phenomenon, it got used by people in so many different walks of life, so many different industries, in solar developers, in conventional energy development. I worked on combined cycle power plants. I worked on cures for cancer. I worked on defense and government applications. I mean, I could just go on and on and on and on. And increasingly large companies started to embrace it and use it as a philosophy to reinvigorate their management system. So I really got to see the very best of what management can do and also its limitations.
Yeah, definitely. And what made you write Incorruptible now and publish it now compared to other time periods?
Well, I wish I had, like I wish you could say I had such incredible foresight that I knew the issue of public corruption was going to be on people's minds so much as it is today. That was obviously not anything I could have foreseen. I embarked on this book, gosh, 3 years ago, something like that. It's taken me a long time to develop it, a long time to write it, research it, figure it out. But to me, this is just a straightforward extension of the work I've been doing for 20 years. I want to help people create really great organizations. And I've been at it long enough. I've helped a lot of people create a lot of companies. I mean, a lot of companies. And every day I meet people now because been on a book tour who tell me, like you did, that Lean Startup helped them create a great company that I never even heard of. I didn't even know. So I only know the hundreds of companies that I personally know the story and I help them, but there's probably thousands more that I don't even know. That's the privilege of publishing a book like Lean Startup and having people embrace it. But I've also seen the dark side of this business. I've seen so many founders lose control of their company. I've seen so many companies turn bureaucratic or malignant or worse. And I know a lot of people who've had a lot of conventional success and are totally miserable. And I started to ask myself this question: if the people who are the so-called winners of this system, after all the moral compromises and all the giving up of their idealism and all that stuff, if after all that they're still not happy, then what was it all for? Who does this system benefit? And I've just started to really grapple with this question of what is going on with these companies. And it took me a long time because we don't even really know what to call it, right? Like imagine you have a solar company. Like, why do people get into solar? Because they want to make money? Are you kidding me? It's so right. Really? There's a lot of easier ways to make money than solar. And obviously, like that's true for all kinds of entrepreneurship. You don't become an entrepreneur to make money. That's crazy. Your odds of success are so low. No, people get into it because they have some kind of principle or value that they are committed to, some person that they want to serve, some reason they think the world should be different. And unfortunately, we live in the era of what's called shareholder primacy, which holds that although you probably think that the company you started is a beautiful, vital, living organism that produces high quality products that delight customers and has a positive impact in the world. Yeah.
Yes, of course.
Sucker. Sucker. I can't believe you that. Oh, you don't know? According to the law that we all live under. No, no, no. You're the sucker at the table. Actually, organizations are just financial instruments designed to enrich their shareholders. That's all they are. And so what happens is we see companies who have these lofty missions or mission statements come into contact with this underlying legal reality that they're actually supposed to be extraction machines. And so what happens, people have been telling me all their stories as I travel around the country now doing talks about the new book. People tell me all these stories about their favorite restaurant gets taken over by private equity. Their favorite brand goes public and then it goes, to hell. Then companies as they get bigger, their commitment to quality decreases, their trustworthiness decreases. And it's not a single person has called me up to tell me a story that's like, hey, private equity bought my favorite restaurant. And now thanks to the vast financial resources of the private equity firm, the food got more delicious. No, it's
Yeah,
always
you
the
never heard
opposite
that.
direction. Yeah. So what's going on? We don't even know what to call this. Well, our grandparents and our great grandparents, they knew what to call it. They would have called it corruption. That's what's going on. If a solar developer gets turned into a fossil fuel company, that's a corruption of the intention by which the company operated. If it loses its commitment to its community, to its purpose, to the principles that it exists to serve, it loses the thing that made it worth building in the first place. That is a corruption, like a corrosion in the joints, disintegrating the thing that made the company special. And in a lot of cases, I tell the story in the book, a lot of these stories in the book, these corruptions lead to a collapse of the whole enterprise. So what's really interesting to me is we live in an era where the average longevity of companies is falling. The average manager tenure at companies is falling. The average stock holding period of public equities is falling. The graphs look remarkably similar. It's just collapse, collapse, collapse. And therefore we live in an era of collapsing trust. The graphs all look the same. So we live in this era of temporary organizations being run by temporary managers for the benefit of temporary owners. And we don't know what to call it. We can't even say it's bad because we're all supposed to pretend that we think all the different ways of making money are equally good, but no one really thinks that. Certainly not anyone who went into solar. Are you kidding me? No, we have a belief. I call it the builder's intuition that the best way to make money is to create more value than you capture, because then all the profit you make by definition leaves the world better off. And I think there's something deeply human about that. That's part of our spiritual traditions going back thousands of years and part of the philosophic and economic tradition. You can find this in the writings of so many great thinkers over the years. And we've kind of lost it. It's kind of fallen out of the common discourse. And I think it's time to bring it back.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that was such a great description of corruption and what's happening currently in modern day. I mean, it's interesting because we've seen this within the renewable energy industry. A lot of, companies have failed because they lost sight of their mission and they received a lot of capital from large private equity funds. And then they were ultra aggressive to increase shareholder value, and they lost track of the mission, and eventually they were just too aggressive that they actually went out of business. And it's
Yep.
interesting, most people who actually go into renewable energy are doing it because of the mission. And it's interesting to see over time too, like how many companies have got out of business because they lost the trust with their customers. They lost track of their mission. And it was all about increasing shareholder value and not really
Yeah.
the values of the company. So it's interesting because actually I haven't actually raised capital for my company because I was concerned about, like I want to focus on certain sorts of things that I think will add the most value. So once you add like obviously outside investors, that could change obviously the dynamic, because their
Yeah.
focus is getting to an exit event or monetization. And so it's interesting because a lot of what you talked about, I relate with. And then like just going back to like your first book, I was part of an accelerator called Startup Leadership Program, SLP. And then this was actually the first book that they recommended us to read to start a company. And I think like, can you imagine like the impact that you've had with obviously the books, working with many different companies, the podcast, like I'm sure, it's obviously like surprising for you to hear like how much impact you've had in the world with the work that you've done as well, right?
Oh, it's been incredible. Yeah, and I could never have anticipated how it would be. But I think, yeah, you put an idea into the world, you never know what's going to happen. You don't know if anyone going to keep working these books for years and years. You never know. Is anyone going to care? Is anyone even going to notice? And the fact that people have become evangelists for these books and spread them and recommended them and handed them to people and say, you got to read this. That's ultimately that makes it all work. And I want to address something you said though about the taking on of investment. We're living in a time, this is actually crazy to me, where your views are not uncommon. A lot of really great companies view investment as too dangerous to pursue because it will inevitably lead to the loss of mission. This is the downside of shareholder primacy. And
Yeah.
and increasingly more and more companies are turning away from investors. They're turning away even from the idea of being a for-profit company altogether. Like I think a lot of people in the younger generations see for-profit automatically as a vector of corruption, investment as a vector of corruption, because that's what they've. I mean, I don't blame them. Look around. That's the reality that they've lived in. Cory Doctorow calls it enshittification. Like you see these products that get worse and worse and worse as the companies get richer and richer and richer, and they conclude that what it means to make a profit is to extract as much for yourself at the expense of others. But I don't think it has to be that way. We don't have to build a financial system that works that way. We could build a different one. But more importantly, there are techniques that are known, where there's strong research to support and make it possible to build a mission-driven company to a blueprint that is strong enough to resist all these corrupting forces.
Yeah. And you talk about that in the book. Can you like talk about how like mission driven companies can protect their mission as they scale?
Sure, yeah, it's basically a formula. And the formula is very simple. It's just ethos plus integrity. Okay, so let's unpack it.
Mhm.
Ethos is the character of an organization, what it stands for. So ethos is fundamentally a leadership principle. It is leadership with the goal of producing alignment or coherence of all the people that are touched. A lot of the reason people see investment as a source of corruption is that oftentimes the goals of investors are not aligned with the goals of the rest of the enterprise. But that doesn't have to be the case. We could certainly set it up so that they are. But before we get to investors, we have to first start with just like, what is our intention? What does it mean to make a profit? Most companies do not actually declare their purpose. Their legal documents just say to pursue any lawful act or activity. Any lawful act or activity, no matter how harmful, right? No. So there's a lot of techniques we can use, like the public benefit corp filing, a very easy filing you can do in Delaware to establish formally that the company has some non-financial purpose that is seeking to pursue. There's the operational discipline of making what I call fiduciary commitments. So whose interests would you put before your own? What principle would you rather die than betray? Those are the kind of questions that we have to make to develop an ethos as a company. Then integrity. Integrity is about structure. So like think about a bridge that doesn't collapse, even though it's under a lot of pressure or weight, right? Like there's a lot of gravity, but gravity doesn't cause every bridge to collapse, only the badly designed ones. So what is the equivalent of like the good design, the good materials for a corporation, for an organization? And there we do things like figure out how to make sure that the board of directors is aligned to the mission. How do we make sure, like doctors have to take a Hippocratic oath? Why don't directors have to take an oath? There should be a director's oath, like the Hippocratic oath, but for directors. And of course, there are these structures, many of them actually in the world, that produce the kinds of checks and balances so that somebody can be what I call the mission guardian. Someone has the responsibility for overseeing mission integrity, holding the board of directors accountable. And that can really provide the counterweight necessary to make investment safe. So sometimes the mission guardian is the founder with super voting shares. Sometimes it's a nonprofit foundation, like in the case of Hershey Chocolate or Novo Nordisk. Sometimes it's what's called a purpose trust, like they have at Patagonia. It can be an employee ownership trust or an ESOP, like at Taylor Guitars or a John Lewis Partnership. It could actually be a cooperative, like at Vanguard or REI or Mondragon in Spain. And there's many more. There's just a couple to scratch the surface. It turns out there's this whole universe of structures designed to produce mission longevity. And just to cherry pick one stat from the book, companies that have the industrial foundation structure are 5 times more likely to live to year 50 compared to companies with a conventional structure. It is a dramatically different outcome. And there's a lot of data like this to support employee ownership, to support purpose-driven, mission-driven companies creating outperformance. So this is not just a moral argument, but also a performance argument. Our goal is to protect companies from the forces that will drag them away from the very mission that made them profitable in the first place.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I know. Can you talk about maybe companies today that are actually like mission driven? Obviously, people are familiar with like Patagonia, Ben and Jerry's ice cream. You talk about it as well. Like what companies that maybe people are familiar with have like the sort of structure that you talk about today?
Yeah, so let me tell you a story that kind of encapsulates the whole story, both the
Sure.
problem and the solution. Okay. And we're going to keep it far away from solar and energy and complicated stuff. Let's keep it real simple. All right. Let's talk about retail. Retail is a very simple business. It should be really simple. And yet, for many, many, many years, retail was an industry that was exploitative to its customers because most customers were captive. Deceptive pricing was rampant. Companies would try to mark up products as much as they could because they saw having a high margin as a source of strength. Anyway, Saul Price was an entrepreneur in the 50s who looked at this whole industry and said, this doesn't make any sense to me at all. He was a lawyer before he became an entrepreneur. And as a lawyer, he said, my client is my fiduciary. I have to put my interests before my client's interest before my own. So when he became a retailer, he asked himself the simple question, who's my client? He said, oh, the customer is obviously my client. I am a fiduciary to the customer. That was his operating principle for a company he called FedMart. FedMart was a membership club, warehouse, bare bones. He practiced what he called capped margins. So he wouldn't mark up an item more than 14%. And as a result, customers trusted him. If he found out that a competitor had the product at a lower price, he'd post about it in his own store. He'd be like, hey, just so you know, you get this product cheaper from someone else. He's like, so I'm your fiduciary. My job is to get you the lowest price, however that works. Anyway, very ethical person, the kind of leader we all wish CEOs would be. He paid above market wages. He did a bunch of good stuff. He was an early opponent of segregation, did a lot of good things. Anyway, the company thrived. He became a wealthy man. He took it public. He made a lot of money for his investors. And you want to guess how satisfied they were with this explosive growth? Not at all.
Not at all. Yeah.
Not at all. They always wanted more. And from their point of view, they couldn't understand why was Saul paying wages higher than he had to? Why did he have lower margins than he could have? They kept being like, hey, listen, because people trust you, why don't you betray them so we can make a little extra money?
Yeah.
Because they believed in the best practices of that time. Anyway, after 20 years of building FedMart into this behemoth, Saul comes to work one day and in 1975, and he can't get into his office because they've changed the locks on the door. He doesn't work there anymore. Board gets him out of the way. And with him out of the way, then they're able to use conventional retail best practices to make FedMart more profitable. They made it so profitable, in fact, that within 7 years, it had been completely liquidated.
Wow.
There are no FedMart stores today. Went bankrupt in 1982. So this is one of many, many, many examples in the book of companies that are murdered in the name of profit. Now, I like this story because it has a happy ending. Most of these stories are just miserable, and then that's the end. But the story has a happy ending because Saul Price, classic entrepreneur, he took 2 weeks off after this betrayal. He leased an office upstairs from FedMart in the same building, and he got back to work. He created something he called the Price Club, which today is not that well known. But when I was a kid, that's where my family shopped. The Price Club was an institution. And it's not that well known today because something else happened at the same time. One of his proteges, someone who had worked his way up from stock boy to executive at FedMart, quit in protest when Saul was fired. And he would eventually go on to start his own company along the same model. And eventually his company and Saul's company would merge to form a combined company they called Price Costco.
Oh,
What
wow.
we just call Costco. See, I've just told you the deep cut backstory of how Costco was founded. Costco still embodies that Saul Price ethos all these years later, even though now it is a $400 billion public company. So why was FedMart destroyed, but Costco endures? It's not just the leadership principles. Those are important. That's a precondition. But Costco is also protected by what I call a governance fortress of special provisions that make sure that outside agitators cannot bully them into abandoning their ethos, which happens every couple of years. Wall Street constantly is attacking Costco, constantly trying to get it to change its ways. One of my favorite quotes in the book is from a Wall Street analyst who says something like, Costco takes money that rightfully belongs to shareholders and instead invests it in improving the customer experience. So yeah, and that integrity, that ability to keep a promise is what makes Costco distinctive, but it's enabled by choices they've made on the governance side, that governance ratings agencies that like have the responsibility of defining what makes good governance have given Costco their worst possible score.
Yeah.
Because they violate these best practices. So part of the challenge, especially for, in people who have a social mission or environmental or some kind of like extra financial goal with their company, you have to understand how radical that makes you in today's business context. That you are already, just by making that commitment, defying the most important of these best practices. And so once you start to see these best practices as value destroying, we can start to ask ourselves the more important question of, well, what are the practices that can supplant or replace them?
Yeah, you did such a great job of explaining that. And I think our audience really learned a lot from that. And obviously you could read more about it in the book. And it was just for me, really interesting to read it in the book, but then also to hear you explain it as well. So,
No, thanks.
it's just really, yeah, that's really interesting. I know this is not really covered in the book, but this kind of reminds me too, when I was reading it about what's happening with Anthropic today,
Of course.
and talking about having some sort of controls related to AI and having a board, then there's talks about the government getting involved. Do you have perspective on that? Because that's something that we're seeing today about AI and maybe using AI in a negative way, right? Not just on a, obviously profitability, but also, there could be uses that.
Oh, yeah. Look, Anthropic is in the book as a case study because I played a very big part in the founding of the company. Now, to be clear, I am not taking credit for Anthropic's extraordinary success. Okay, my role was extremely small, but I did get to meet with them when they left OpenAI and they were thinking about the structure. And all credit to Dario and Daniela and the whole team. They foresaw that if this technology worked, it would be worth trillions of dollars. And it would be something that nation states and public companies alike would covet and try to control. So they understood that it was like morally unacceptable for this technology to be sold to the highest bidder, and that they needed to take extra steps to ensure that their mission, their values, their commitment to safety could be protected. Does that make Anthropic a perfect company? No. Have they made no mistakes? No. Do I agree with every decision they've made? No, of course not. Being strong means being coherent with one's own values and being able to resist pressure. It doesn't mean we agree with everything that they do. I think part of the problem in our hyperpolarized age is we can only call someone right if we agree with them 100%. That's crazy talk. You have to be able to respect someone who acts with integrity, even if you don't agree with everything that they choose. Now, does that mean that you have to give the benefit of the doubt to every malign jerk in the world? No, not that either. But we can tell the difference. Normal people can tell the difference between someone acting with integrity and someone who's just posturing. And I think so far, the early returns, we'll see. Anthropic's got a long way to go. But so far, the early returns is they seem to be unusually courageous amongst their peer companies. They seem to periodically be called upon to stand up for what they think is right, and they have the strength and the structure to do so.
And it's been amazing to see, like with the U.S. government, like that takes a lot of strength.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that they've been consistently rewarded for from the market. Again, I don't see how they could possibly have anticipated that would happen. So I think it's quite a remarkable run they've been on.
How can like solar and climate tech companies balance profit, impact, and long-term trust?
If you think about like, okay, let's do a little checklist. Okay, real simple.
Sure.
First thing you got to do is decide on what your corporate purpose is going to be. If you're in solar, man, if you tell me your mission is to do something in solar, but then I read your legal charter and it says maximize shareholder value is your legal purpose, you're already in big trouble, okay? Because there's so many energy projects where if you converted them to conventional energy sources, you would violate the mission, but you probably could make a short-term profit. And if you're telling me that that will never happen, there'll never be a situation where that economics might work out, and that's your protection against the mission, you're kidding yourself, man. That's all it takes is one board member, one investor, one person to show up and say, you know what, I think we could make a little extra money if we do this horrible thing. And if you've committed yourself legally to that regime, then you'll be forced to say yes. I tell the story in the book of a company that was forcibly acquired by Philip Morris International, a healthcare company forced to be owned by a cigarette maker. And it was just an immense act of value destruction. I mean, after the acquisition, Philip Morris basically destroyed the company within 3 years. But the board said, well, we have no choice. It's our fiduciary duty to say yes to this monstrous thing. The premium that Philip Morris was willing to pay over other bidders was 15 cents a share. Wasn't even
well, that's nothing. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, that's the first thing. So I recommend we define profit as the maximization of human flourishing. If we focus on some version of that kind of purpose statement and we write that into the legal charter using something like the PPC filing, that's the first step. Got to do that. Second question is like at the level of the operating system of the company. I have basically 2 checks I want to do for every company. One, does the business model structured in such a way that the company cannot make money except by accomplishing the mission? If it can, it will. So don't leave those temptations open. And then obviously, is the culture aligned? Do the employees of the company know that even if there's no manager present, they need to enact these values and support this mission? There's a lot in the book about how to do that. And then, yeah, I would pick a structure. I would pick something like the director's oath, something like the industrial foundation structure. Certainly for a solar company, I would almost always think a nonprofit mission guardian would be the best, or a purpose trust. Those seem like very obvious choices to me. If you, a lot of companies listening to this, a lot of founders, a lot of leaders, board members, if they ask their conventional lawyers about it, the lawyers will either say, never heard of it, or we're like, oh, that's something weird and complicated and old fashioned. So if you get that kind of runaround, or even like, oh yeah, that's a good idea, but we should do that later. One of the key ideas in the book is that it's always too early until it's too late. So I actually got so frustrated with lawyers doing this that I helped start my own law firm called Virgil. So people can check out tryvirgil.com. There's literally, we have lawyers who specialize in doing this for early stage companies at extremely low cost because we use AI to drive all the cost out of it. So if people want to get in touch there, that's a source of additional legal advice on these questions.
Yeah, definitely. And we'll have that on the notes of the podcast as well. And I
Right.
have one last question, Eric. How does AI change the lean startup principles and build measure lean cycle?
I feel like lean startups held up pretty well in the age
Definitely.
of AI. Yeah, like I was on the Lenny podcast, and Lenny was like, "Oh, the top frontier labs, their product teams use these principles to this day, and that's how they're getting ahead." It's very straightforward, and I feel like the basic idea that in a highly uncertain, highly democratizing, or speed increasing technological paradigm, it just makes sense to use a scientific method to try to figure out what's really true. And at the end of the day, entrepreneurship is a truth-seeking discipline. So I don't know. I feel like it held up pretty well.
It definitely has. I really appreciate you making time out of your busy schedule, Eric, to be on the Solar Maverick podcast. Again, your new book is Incorruptible. Where can we call our audience Mavericks, where can they find the book?
You can find all the different independent bookstores around the world that are selling the book at incorruptible.co, as well as, of course, anywhere else books are sold online. You can get all the usual places. And if you go to the website, you can sign up for the mailing list and get a whole bunch of bonuses and implementation guides and readers guides and a lot of cool stuff. So please do check that out.
And that's amazing. And then you're still on your book tour, so people could obviously join you on the book tour, and I'm sure we'll
Yeah,
have
please
all
have
the
people are welcome to do that. I maintain a website called howisincorruptiblegoing.com, where you can check all the events and podcasts and interviews and stuff and all the awards and things the book is winning. So yeah, if you want to follow along that way, howisincorruptiblegoing.com.
That's great as well. We'll have that on the notes of the podcast. We'll have also your LinkedIn profile, a link to both Incorruptible and obviously your first book as well. Thank you, Eric, for making the time. I really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure.
Thankful to our audience, and
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right, congratulations to you too. Thanks everybody. Make sure to like and subscribe, as the kids say.
For sure.
Take care. All right, bye bye.
Thank you.